Hi everyone, welcome to Evolve Microservices API session. My name is Bobur. I am a developer advocate. In today's session, we are going to talk about how you can manage your .NET Microservices API with API Gateway, specifically using Apache API 6 for the applications developed in ASP.NET. I provide a very easy example of how to deploy multiple API 6 related components using Docker Compose, and I will show you how to configure routing for the API and enable the traffic management plugin for your example .NET application throughout this demo session. So with that, let's get started.
In today's world, we usually create multiple microservices for a particular product. And for each of these services, we'll have a different endpoint accessing these services from the external world. And it doesn't make sense exposing multiple URLs. We should have a single entry point to all our services. And based on different passes, we should be doing the routing. API Gateway is a central point for routing all incoming requests to their intended destination, whether that can be upstream API server or third-party service, database, or even serverless. Basically, it acts as a single layer between your user clients and your backend services. In many microservices scenarios, authentication, security, observability, caching, transformation are handled centrally. Without an API gateway in place, you might typically implement these concerns for each service, because maintaining them for each service would be a very challenging task and time consuming. At the same time, you can get a benefit of an API gateway in reducing complexity, delivering a high performance for your APIs, and it helps you to scale your microservices. The API Gateway topic could easily carry many video tutorials, but this time I focus on the most common features like routing and rate limiting for our example .NET project on GitHub. What we do today, we are going to clone a demo project called API6.NET Docker from my GitHub repo and understand the structure of the project. We'll walk through the Docker Compose YAML file, and we're going to build the multi-container API 6 via Docker CLI, and we're going to configure API 6 routing for our ASP.NET API. And at the end, I will show you how to enable traffic management plugin. Here are some of the prerequisites to successfully work with a project, example project. And for demonstration, we're going to use .NET 6 SDK. You can use Visual Studio Code or Visual Studio 2022. It's up to your preference. In my case, I'm using VS Code. So and make sure that Docker desktop also installed on your local machine. In my case, I'm using Windows operating system. You can also find this how to install instruction on the GitHub page or the blog post. Here's the link to GitHub project. I have API6.NET Docker. I'm leaving out all the links and references out there on the YouTube description, and you can also find the blog post version of this project and the same link list. So what do we do now? We can just simply use a git clone to clone the repository and go to root directory of API6.NET Docker. You can open the project in your favorite code editor. I used VS Code. You will see the following project structure. Let's understand the structure of the project. You hear the list of main components. You can take a look. Let's say API6 config files. We have a YAML file. All the services are configured by mounting configuration files in the project on the Docker containers through this config YAML. It defines just the configs for API 6, which plugins you're gonna use and which ports and which admin key you will have, and etc. Similarly, we have etcd dashboard config and or API 6 config, Grafana config if you are going to use Grafana config. If you would like to integrate a Prometheus, you can also customize a Prometheus config YAML file. And you can see also the API 6 log folder, where API 6 it generates some logs based on the request that we are doing against API 6 admin API, and also some errors you can see out. But the main folder we're going to focus today is a product API that we have now. If you look at the folder structure, we do have controller class, a simple controller class with only single get at point, which just retrieves a list of products from the iProduct service. And we have a domain for the product with basically with a name and its price. Also, we do have some services and also a Docker file under the product API project. But it has just a standard Docker file structure. This file is responsible for pulling .NET 6 SDK, because we are using for this project .NET 6, and ESP.NET 6 images will be pulled from Docker registry, and we're gonna build and run the application with the following Docker images. If you go a little up to the root project, we have another main file, Docker Compose YAML. We have some components shown here. Let's say if you're gonna use API 6 dashboard, you can also specify an API 6 dashboard will be available on port 9000. That's just a dashboard that offers another way to interact with the API 6 admin API. And also we have the main API 6 here, the image that we are saying Docker to bring. And also we have etcd configuration, because API 6 uses etcd to save and synchronize the configuration. This is Prometheus and Grafana. They are very optional. Let's say if you would like to fetch metrics data about upstream APIs together with Prometheus plugins, you can use them. And here finally we have the product API image. It's searched for Docker file under a product API folder, and when you do Docker Compose up, it will map and run the product API on this port 5555. You may also notice that all the services mapped to the API 6 network, and because when you do this routing and using API 6, it's a preferable way to use them inside the one network. Now we can go to terminal and start our application by running Docker Compose up, maybe the -d daemon, and the root folder of the project. If I do press enter, as you can see, some running container list I have available. This also you can see by running Docker Compose ps command. Let's say Docker Compose ps. You can see it's also available the containers up and running. I have also Docker desktop installed as a prerequisite for this video tutorial. As you can see, these containers up and running like a dashboard, API 6 and product API. For example, if you navigate to /API products to the localhost 5555, now you can see also the API responding to our requests here, with only two products list is coming up from the backend service. Also, for example, you can see the dashboard, API 6 dashboard up and running on localhost 9000. If you would like to play with API 6 dashboard, there are some other video tutorials I have, and also you can read more information on the API 6 documentation. So now we have all good, our containers up and running. Next, we can try to configure API 6 API Gateway. So when you set up Apache API 6 API Gateway for your APIs, it adds many capabilities, including, as we mentioned earlier, routing, and or rate limiting that in our case. We can create a route and configure underlying upstream. When Apache APS receives requests from let's say outside the world to the /API/products endpoint, it will forwards to the underlying upstream, in our case product API. So let's start with adding a route and upstream for these /API/products endpoint. The following command creates a sample route together with an upstream. You can read more about how to create the route or upstream and the API6 documentation and how to also map them together. I will run this curl command by accessing API6 admin API securely. If I press enter, now I will get the response from API6. That's all good. And now we have this upstream as a product API configured that serves for this URI. We can check that if API6 should forward the request to our target API when we try to access /API/products with this curl command. Here we go. Yes. It actually does. You can see the output. It's routing to the product API endpoint, and this response is coming from product service. Also, you can also add 2 or more routes, as we did above. If to your API gateway, let's say one can serve for your product API, the another one for customer microservices, maybe with a URL path /API/customers instead of /products. Next, we can try to enable one of the traffic management plugin. With the help of API gateway, let's say we can set automatic retries, timeouts, circuit breakers, and rate limiting for our external upstream API or microservice, in our case our product API. Let's say rate limiting is also a strategy for limiting network traffic. It should be under the traffic management plugins on API6 website. Is also, let's say, take a look, for example, limit count. Limit count plugin also able to limit request rate by fixed number of requests in the given time window. We can try to enable this limit count plugin for our /products API. To do so, we can run the following command. The example of commands you can find from the blog post. You can just copy or paste or customize these configs curl commands by itself. And here, as you can see, we are setting the same URI, products API path, and for any given get requests, we are enabling limit count plugin. In that case, this below configuration limits the number of requests to only twice in 60 seconds. And API6 will handle first 2 requests, and as usual, but the short request is in the same period we return 403 HTTP code. If I run this command by pressing enter, API6 says OK, and now this limit count plugin enabled for our endpoint. We can test it. Let's say I'm going to call this API a couple of times, like 3 times. When you call the first time within 6 seconds, it's okay. And when you call the second time, it's also fine. When you call the third time within the same period, you see we got the error by saying you're requesting our API too frequent. Please try later again with the HTTP 403 forbidden error. That's cool, right? After reaching this threshold, the subsequent requests are not allowed by the API6. So we made the use of Apache API6 Docker Compose example, and this is my repo project, also a little customized from Apache API6 Docker project. It's very active and frequently updated. You can also take this example project and little modernize and add your customized configuration on the top of Docker Compose file. As you can see today, we are able to deploy several components in one run, and we demonstrated how the API gateway can be used to manage a simple ESP.NET application, and to retrieve the, let's say, product data using a product microservice API. Also, you learned how to enable limit count plugin for the endpoint. There are many other built-in plugins available in the Apache API 6 website. You can find them under the plugin hub page. Basically, API 6 can be the lightweight middleware API gateway, regardless of which programming language, frameworks, tools, or platforms you are developing for your microservices or application.